What we witnessed in the Oval Office last week was not just a diplomatic embarrassment. It was a full-scale realignment of American power away from democracy straight into the hands of Vladimir Putin. The leader of the free world is no longer the president of the United States. In fact, the only thing that seems to be the leading institution is the international spectacle of autocratic bootlicking. And let's lay it out. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, a man fighting for his nation's very survival, stepped into the White House expecting to secure a vital U.S. backing from a minerals deal. Instead, he walked onto the set of an episode of The Apprentice, Dictator's Edition. What should have been a show of unity turned into a humiliation ritual orchestrated by Donald Trump and his ever pliant sidekick, J.D. Vance, fresh off of a European tour where he essentially told NATO allies to fend for themselves. Trump berated Zelenskyy like a schoolyard bully, sneering, "You've done enough talking. You're not winning this." This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't strength. This was an ambush. We wouldn't have seen this with President George W. Bush. We wouldn't have seen this with President Barack Obama. We wouldn't have seen this with President Bill Clinton. We sure didn't see it during President Joe Biden's administration. What was the message? Well, the message was crystal clear. Trump, the same man who once wrapped himself in the America First mantra, has officially rebranded the GOP as the Russia First Party. You could hear the cheers from the Kremlin as Trump openly signaled that Ukraine, and by extension every other democratic ally, is on its own. Meanwhile, world leaders from Poland to Japan reaffirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine, proving that America is no longer setting the standard for global leadership. It's a pariah now, an unreliable partner whose word is worth less than a bankrupt casino chip. And let's talk about the Republican reaction, or rather the stunning lack of it. Imagine just for one moment if Barack Obama had humiliated an allied leader in the Oval Office. Imagine if Joe Biden had dismissed the nation fighting for its survival with flippant, "You're not winning this" language. Sean Hannity would be apocalyptic. Lindsey Graham would be holding emergency press conferences, calling for impeachment before the echoes of the insult had even faded. But because it's Trump, the party that once screamed about America first and American strength and standing with our allies has fallen silent, or worse, they're defending this spectacle. This past Tuesday night, we witnessed Trump's first address to Congress since getting back into the Oval Office. His State of the Union proved that discipline in Washington depends entirely on what party you belong to. Remember when Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie," at President Obama? He got campaign donations and got reelected. When Representative Al Green of Texas was forcibly removed from Trump's speech for protesting that Trump did not have a mandate. Marjorie Taylor Greene last year heckled Biden like a drunk fan at a football game. And what happened when the same Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was sitting right behind the president? Nothing. The message is that if you're a Democrat, it seems that you're held to a higher or different standard. If you're a Republican, you could degrade the institution as much as you want, so long as you kiss Trump's ring while you're doing it. Tonight, I'm so glad to be joined with friends of the Political Mike podcast. I've got Reggie, who is one of our correspondents at the Democratic National Convention this summer, back on the panel. I'm so glad to have you here. He's hailing out of, correct me if I'm wrong, you're hailing out of the state of Oregon, correct?
Yep.
Josh Lewis, of course, from Oklahoma, host of the Saving Elephants podcast. Excellent insight, and I'm thankful and fortunate to have you on the panel tonight.
It's always good to be here, Mike.
Mr. Stephen Foster of whattheyshouldSay.org, a journalist, someone who's also a friend of the Political Mike and always brings keen insight to the table. So thank you for being part of the show, Mr. Foster.
Thank you, Mike.
And of course, Nate Honore, who is a regular on the program. He is a graduate of Quinnipiac University, someone who is a social activist in his own right, and someone who's a astute political mind. So great panel. Panelists, I want to start off the discussion with this past Tuesday's address. This past Tuesday's address, there was so much to unpack here. One of the things that was notable about the speech was that Biden's name was evoked repeatedly, specifically in a negative light. Trump repeatedly tried to draw a contrast between himself and the former president. He said that the former president, his predecessor, left a terrible economy. But when you look at the record, when you look at the numbers, they tell a different story. Inflation on January 20th of 2025 was at a rate of 2.9%. The S&P 500 was at $5,996.56. Gas was $3.12. Unemployment was at 4.1%. The Dow Jones was 43,487.83. Now, what was the point of bringing up Biden's name? Was it simply to try to draw a contrast and to kind of set the stage for what he calls America's comeback, America's golden era? Or was there some personal grievances here that caused him to constantly harken back to the Biden administration, in your view?
Well, it's from my view, it was rationally inexplicable. It was unprecedented. No previous president before a joint session had ever berated one of his predecessors by name at that. So it's rationally inexplicable. There has to be some psychological pathology that would explain it. I mean, clearly, it was so off the rails in terms of norms, institutional norms, norms of decorum, norms of every possible norm. It's inexplicable. I would love to hear an explanation that even approached rationality. I mean, I really would love to hear an explanation that that made any sense at all. I mean, and to me, that is probably what triggered all the protests. It actually almost sanitized any protest that would follow, because it was so uncouth, and it was so I would love to hear an explanation, because it boggles my mind.
Well, I don't know if it's that hard to figure out. Biden was a historically unpopular president with a lower approval rating than Trump after January 6th. What's more, personal than that for Trump and the Republican Party is that Biden is the person who interrupted Trump terms, and they spent their entire opposition for Biden as president as an evil, going to take away their and their freedom and all sorts of.
That better? Perfect. So what I was saying, yeah, it's not super difficult to figure out. Biden was one of the most unpopular presidents in history. He left office with a lower approval rating than Trump did after January 6th. And he is, for the Republican Party, the unifying, he was their, I guess, to use a Clintonite term, their triangle that they triangulated around, that he unified the whole party in opposition. So Trump, who as a politician has spent his entire 10 years as a politician doing nothing but throwing red meat at his base, is going to use every opportunity to jazz them up by, throwing dirt at the people they hate the most, which, Joe Biden is, if he's not at the top of the list, is very close to the top of that list. And frankly, it's not really unexpected either. We kind of should expect this from Trump. We're 10 years in.
I guess one of the things I think I have to take it from a perspective of there may be a deeper inner issue that's happening in there. We watched a deeply angry man speak angrily and hatefully into the American psyche and whipped us up. And I think, like some of the legislators and some of the leaders said, this is not normal. And so by setting the tone that what we were going to see isn't normal, we're able to walk around this whole situation with the reality is there is no desire to legislate. There is no referendum for the Trump agenda. It is simply a 4-year holding pattern of hatred and the resetting of the cultural norms so that the worst of America can then boil up and then push forward. So I'm looking at it not so much as a political statement. I'm looking at it as a diagnostic tool of the American psyche. We are more divided than we have historically been, and we got to watch the resetting of cultural and American norms.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what Nate had shared, that I myself don't necessarily find it difficult to understand. That's not the same as making an excuse for it, say. But it does seem to be relatively straightforward in that Trump is repeating, in effect, what is in his best interest to, if the more you can vilify the last guy, even if you have to call him out by name, the more you can level set to put yourself in a better position so that if we go, there's nowhere to go but up from here because the other guy had screwed it up so bad, if he can just sell that message. I'm not going to try to diagnose necessarily someone's psyche, but it wouldn't surprise me if there is also an element of a begrudginess to it, because I think Trump genuinely believes the Democratic Party, with Biden at the helm, leading the charge, perpetrated lawfare against him. Now, it's a separate question whether or not he was actually guilty of the things people were going at him at. But I think for him, this has become personal. So it doesn't necessarily surprise. I mean, he did the same in his acceptance speech, right? He didn't call out Biden by name, but alluded to the fact that things had gone wrong, and the very guy was sitting there next to him as he was speaking. So this is not surprising to me. I think this is the Trump we've seen for many years, maybe just coming to a fuller fruition.
Well, I mean, I'm just coming at it from the aspect of it being unprecedented in American history. I mean, a joint session of Congress just does not happen. It's so far afield from norms, from presidential norms and presidential, I hate to use the word decorum, but I mean, it's just, and it was unprovoked. It was unprovoked. It was just, it was gratuitous. And, I understand him having aught with Biden and the Biden administration. I understand that. But I mean, it was unprovoked, and it was in a setting in which that kind of thing had never, ever happened before. So it's like, I mean, so I think what Mr. Richardson said really, I think it was a purposeful attempt to change cultural norms. So I think it was a purposeful attempt to do that. And I understand that, he was throwing red meat, but even that is unusual for that setting, for what was essentially a State of the Union address. So I'm just thinking that what I think Mr. Richardson, at least his explanation, at least resonated with me to some extent in terms of it making some sort of sense. But maybe you guys, are right. But that's my perspective.
And I think one of the things that's important to remember here, there was no call for unity. There was no, as I serve as your president, we are going to move in a sense of unity. And so what would normally be expected from a non-State of the Union joint session would be that we are coming together at the beginning of a new presidency to rally around our common American ideals. But Donald Trump does not desire to be the president for all Americans. He has a specific niche audience. And so when we watch the rhetoric that comes from the Oval Office, we must remember that he desires to be the president for certain people. And with that knowledge, then we navigate and we can look at this with fresh eyes and fresh perspectives, because not once did we see a reach across the aisle. He was focused on, they're never going to give me credit no matter what I do. So there was no give an inch to compromise.
The thing that I don't understand with Democrats is, Nate brought up the poll numbers, right? I brought up the actual receipts of where we were on the 20th of January, 2025. I'm of the opinion, and I've made that clear on this show, everyone might disagree. I don't care. I'm of the opinion that the party really needs to sell the results, right? They need to sell the results. That you have people out here, you have farmers going on TikTok from states that are flyover states like Arkansas, Missouri, complaining that their subsidies have been removed because of an executive order that froze a certain program under the American Rescue Plan. Why aren't more Democrats out there being vocal about where that actually came from? Right? He was on stage saying, "I love my farmers." Why aren't they telling people that the American taxpayer had to pay $16 billion? Not to mention the farmers got really undercut by these unnecessary, unprovoked tariffs that were imposed the first Trump term. Why aren't they out there doing this? The only person I'm hearing is Jasmine Crockett. I heard Hakeem Jeffrey say, "Oh, well, we can't respond to everything." Why are we still operating as if Obama's president or Bush's president? The fact of the matter is, as most of you have alluded to, we're no longer in a normal situation here. That address could have been given at a riotous Trump rally verbatim and probably would have received the response he was looking for, because obviously he was bothered by the fact the Democrats were not clapping for him. It bothered him. He kept alluding to that. It got under his skin somehow. There was even a part where he said, "Oh, I think that me invoking Kennedy's name would have gotten some kind of response from the Democrats." Ignoring the fact that this is a conspiracy theorist Kennedy who was disavowed by his family. But Democrats are not doing what they need to be doing. No, instead we're just, well, the poll numbers said he was unpopular, so we're just going to accept and roll over. No, sell the agenda, sell the results. 2026 is coming. And if we keep operating like this, if Democrats keep operating like this, and they just anticipate that people will just get tired of what they're seeing, and that the chaos will speak for itself, the same surprise that they got in 2024 is going to happen again.
How do you know 2026 is coming from a political standpoint? I mean, can you hear me? Okay, I mean, how do you know it's coming? I mean, we don't know what will happen in 2026. I mean, he anything is possible at this point. He could declare martial law for whatever reason, and suspend the elections if it looks bad for, as it normally does, for the party of the incumbent president in an off-year election. If the polls look terrible, he could just come up with some reason to try to suspend the elections, or postpone them indefinitely. I mean, how do we have no way of knowing for sure that there will be a 2026 off-year elections now? I mean, we are completely off the rails. Am I off the rails in speculating that that's a possibility?
No, I that's a possibility. But and that, to my point, that's why Democrats need to be out there more. We need to be ringing the alarm bell. The normalization of this is what's really getting on my nerves. I mean, I heard David Axelrod on CNN that very night saying, "Oh, well, talking to Scott Jennings. Oh, well, I'll do what you won't be willing to do. I'll accept the fact that Democrats not standing up and clapping at certain times was disgraceful." What are you talking about? Why are you normalizing this, man? Why are you normalizing what's going on? Right? I mean, this is a man who literally returned to the scene of the crime where the January 6th insurrection took place. Why are we normalizing this and then expecting people to say, "Oh, well, those Democrats, they are holding themselves out to a higher standard. I'm really going to support." No, that's never worked. It's never worked. Well, and to your point, yes, they should be out there saying January the 26 midterms, that's up for grabs, because we're not dealing with someone who believes in democracy. He's made that abundantly clear. People have been in denial. People have been in denial so far. That's why we're in this mess. Oh, he's not that bad. I've seen him in the first term, so he can't be that terrible. My price of eggs are going to no. And not only that, but look, get ready for $8 tomatoes for those who did vote for him to lower prices with this unprovoked, unnecessary tariff war that we've just entered into with our neighbors, Canada and Mexico. I mean, the Democrats need to be out there ringing the alarm bell before the actual result happens, so that people understand that what they're saying is valid. So people understand that when they're raising alarm bells, it's not just noise, it's not just rhetoric, it's not just, oh, that's the other side. They need to be out there more aggressively, and they're just not doing it. I don't know what Hakeem Jeffrey's strategy is. I don't know who's. I don't even know why 10 Democrats decided to vote with Republicans to censor Al Green. What was the sense in that? What are they obviously trying? What's the case they're making here?
Well, to your earlier point, Mike, did spend all of 2020 saying all of that. Being bombarded with.
Nate, you're cutting out on us again.
Go ahead, Josh. Nate, go ahead and get reconnected.
Is that
Josh,
better?
go ahead. Yes.
Okay. How much advertising were we bombarded with last election cycle about how the Trump sales tax would raise your prices, about how Trump with no guardrails was bad for all of the American people? We heard all of that during the election cycle. Democrats during campaign cycles are actually shockingly effective messengers. What they did in those years in between major elections is, an entirely different story. But during election cycles, they are quite competent messengers. It's why Democrats were locked in a margin of error race with a historically unpopular president, switched said historically unpopular president out with a last-minute a substitution, and still managed to make a race that they were probably 100% going to lose into a coin flip within 90 days. People chose this. We have to acknowledge that people voted for a president who was going to cut their corn subsidies, who was going to cut their Medicaid, who was going to cut the funding for their rural school district. We do have to square that. Now, as to what Democrats on Capitol Hill are doing, I can't tell you either. When I, see members of Congress standing in Democratic members of Congress whose best attempt at a protest is waving auction signs, what's that supposed to tell me? That Democrats want to bid on fascism? When I see that 47 out of 47 Senate Democrats voted for Marco Rubio to be the Secretary of State after spending 4 years talking about how if Trump came back to power, he was going to staff the executive branch with all sorts of lackeys who would never tell him no, and then voting for Marco Rubio because they said, because they thought he was going to stand up for Trump. What's that supposed to tell me? And it speaks to a greater problem that the Democratic Party has in and of itself. For the past 10 years, the Democratic Party has raised billions of dollars, billions with a B, including over $1 billion from August to November of 2024 when Kamala Harris became the Democratic nominee, telling people that Trump is the leader of a movement that is uniquely dangerous to the United States, to our constitutional republic, and to the very fabric of our society. And yet at every chance, once Trump got back into office, we've seen a party roll over and accommodate. That's the real problem that we're facing. We knew Republicans were going to do all of this. What are Democrats doing now that they had time to plan to be in the opposition and are now finding themselves, in the scenario that nobody wanted to be in?
Yeah, I'm not challenging the fact that Democrats had campaign commercials. I'm not challenging the fact that they had fundraising. We saw so many record-breaking fundraising numbers from the late summer, fourth quarter of the race. That's not the issue. The issue is, why did so many people not vote? We're acting like Trump somehow brought new people to the poll. No, people did not vote. Not enough people voted. Yeah, you had the majority. The 92% is like we keep hearing the black women coming out. NBC News reported you had around 87, 88% of black men support. But why is it that there was such a decline in the overall turnout numbers when you compare that to 2022, when you compare that to 2020? And again, Nate and I have this discussion. It's like we're probably going to be old men debating this. But I will say this, and I will say it again. If you undermine the candidate, you undermine the message. If you undermine the candidate, and the Republicans understand this, for what it's worth, they understand that they have to be lockstep with Donald Trump. And
Mike, your first point was on point in terms of normalization, but the normalizer in chief was Joe Biden.
Yes.
He was a normalizer in chief. Hey, he should have never, ever, I said this in 2020, that he should have never debated Donald Trump. But in 2024, he definitely should have never agreed to debate Donald Trump. That should have been, could have easily said, this is beneath the office of the presidency to debate an insurrectionist and a felon and an adjudicated sexual abuser. I will not lower the dignity of the office to ever debate him. I will not acknowledge him. I will not even be running against him. I will not acknowledge him. He could have done that and gotten away with it easily. You know, so his agreement to debate Trump in the first place was inexcusable. It was political malpractice of the first order, and that's what it proved to be. You know, he would have been the nominee probably had he not debated him. He would have been the nominee. You know, I mean, so so he normalized them by agreeing to debate him. That normalized them completely. That, you know, so all of his convictions and everything else, they were rendered null and void politically when Biden debated.
I actually also adopt that. I think that debating was a mistake, but I also believe the party, for what it's worth, could have done better in the way it handled itself too. I mean, for all the criticism that has gone Biden way, I think there's ample enough criticism to go around. I think there's a reason why Bernie Sanders came out with an op-ed in July saying enough is enough, right? Focus on the agenda. AOC spent over an hour on Instagram Live. Yeah, sorry about that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spent about over an hour on her Instagram Live telling her supporters, if you think there's consensus around Harris or anyone, you're mistaken. We don't have time. We don't have the luxury of falling in love with a candidate right now. You don't like him? Okay, focus on the agenda. Focus on what we've gotten over the past 4 years. Focus on the record. There's a reason why John Fetterman, right, came out and was on the stump actually making the case saying stop, right? Ilhan Omar, the Congressional Black Caucus. These folks understood the importance of agenda-driven campaigning, and that's all I'm saying here. Even now, the wrong conclusions are being drawn, and we're not focusing on drawing the contrast on in real time, telling people, "I told you so."
But Mike, that's not what the voters want. We have to acknowledge the fact that the voters have told us, right? You listen to people when they tell you what they want. Democrats do not want a Bernie Sanders, a AOC, a Jasmine Crockett. The base, the wealth, walking around the floor of the Democratic National Convention, what I saw was that the group of Democrats that we are talking about, that we hope, we aspire to, the ones that we hold our truest American values, those aren't the ones that are, those are not the wealthy Democrats. Those are not the Democrats that hold political positions. Those are not the Democrats. The Americans that get work done, the essence of the American dream, are not the ones who go to conventions. They're rarely elected, or they rarely get a chance to have the financial implications to be able to go. They don't go to conventions. They don't go to SEC meetings. They don't go to these things. And then there's this long diatribes by political pundits and analysts who come down and saying, why aren't the Democrats messaging? Why aren't the parties messaging? The reality is, we are 30 to 40 years behind of the world that we are currently existing in. Democrats are running campaigns if they were running against the likes of Bill Clinton and other leaders in that era. We're not running against the amalgamation that is the current Republican Party. And so when we ran our campaign, we ran against the Republican. We ran against George Bush in 2020. We were running a fictional ghost campaign. And so when we take it from that perspective, we realize, or I at least realize, that the Democratic Party is primarily a party that is just keep the boat floating and don't rock it. Because the rockers of the boat are the Bernie Sanders and the Donald Trumps. These are the people who want to move the America in some direction. But Biden was the great rudder that was stuck in the straight position. America wanted to be sent into different directions, but Biden wanted to keep it going straight. And that's the reality. People elected Biden to keep the status quo, to return us to a sense of normalcy. But Biden promised not to run, and he did anyway.
I agree partially, and I disagree partially. What I do agree with is that people want stability. That's why Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia. That's why what's her name? In Arizona. She lost.
Carrie Lake.
Carrie Lake lost in Arizona, while Glenn Youngkin wins in Virginia. I believe that, the opportunity and the actual facts are just teed up too well for the party to mess this up. I mean, in a matter of a few
Well,
weeks.
it's not just.
Wait, hold on, Nate. The administration has had to reverse course more than a dozen times. Donald Trump's policies, I mean, when I talk about, this is what people voted for. I mean, look at his administration charging full speed ahead with radical cuts, cutting veteran assistance, slashing nuclear security personnel, and even accidentally defunding Ebola prevention. He's showcasing this 16-year-old boy becoming a member of the Secret Service while simultaneously cutting cancer funding. These are things that it doesn't take a rocket science, doesn't take a backroom deal or backroom meeting to come up with. These are things that strictly present the case for themselves. And the only person, again, I'm seeing making the case and actually in committees, ringing the bell, sounding the alarm bell, are folks like Jasmine Crockett, maybe Bernie Sanders, but he's not as loud as I would hope for him to be. But she's the only one.
Mike, I'm sitting here enjoying listening to all this. You shared with me once in the green room. I think this is okay to say that every time I've been on the show, you guys have gotten in the biggest fights. So I'm like, when I'm not here, you're actually pretty, and I hope I'm not starting it because I feel like I'm just sitting back here not saying anything. But I do find this fascinating, and I think this is the painful, necessary conversations that have to take place anytime a political movement or party recognizes they're on the outs trying to figure out what do we need to do. And I also want to be aware of my place because I don't view Joe Biden as this great centrist. I think, how to put this, I do not view Joe Biden or the Democratic Party of the past 4 years as being the party that the American people thought they were getting, particularly Biden, particularly the Joe Biden that ran in 2020. He, in my view, did not govern that way. Now, you're welcome to disagree. I think it's fair to say he didn't govern like Bernie Sanders would have, or many of the others to his left, but I think he ended up being a more radicalizing, more divisive figure than what we were expecting. And so when I'm listening to this, it's interesting to me. It's if the Democratic Party is going to begin to gain traction here, you're going to have to convince those very Americans who chose to vote a different direction, say, that I'm trying to think how to express it. Like the message cannot be, look, you guys are supporting a fascist autocrat. That's insulting to people. I'm not saying you're trying to insult people, but there's got to be something that connects with the voter out there that's willing to listen to the left and the right and doesn't see Trump as the next Hitler. They may actually like what he's doing and to give them the mindset, why? What was it about the previous administration that was so hated that they actually turned to this guy in preference? And yes, I get that we don't want to normalize him, but it can't be as simple as we were just normalizing the guy. There has to be something deeper to recognize, where did the Democratic Party get off? What did the Democratic Party do that made them so alienated from the average voter?
Well, I don't know if you're going to like my answer to your question about what Democrats did to make them.
I usually like at least 50% of what you say, Nate, and then it goes off the rails.
You know, to keep it diplomatic for now, Reggie, to your point about Democrats running against the ghost of the Bush 88, Dole 96, and Bush 2004 campaigns, look at what Democrats. Look at who Democrats chose to give the response to the non-State of the Union, State of the Union. Vaguely, someone between the moderate and centrist camps, a former intelligence officer, who started off her speech by talking about how great Ronald Reagan was. There are 25 people in this country who want to bring back the party of Reagan and Bush. 20 of them work in the booking department on the major networks, MSNBC, CNN, CBS for Face the Nation. There's not a big enough slice of the electorate who wants to bring back the party of Bush. Republicans don't even run on Bush's legacy anymore. George Bush has not appeared at a Republican National Convention since 2004. He was so unpopular in 2008 that John McCain said, no, thank you. I don't want you anywhere near my convention. But every time Democrats want to appeal to the country, they start talking about how great things were under George Bush. Nobody likes George Bush. Like, why are we doing that? There is not a big enough slice of the electorate who wants to bring back the days of George Bush, but that's who Democrats focus on all the time. And in 2024, we saw the most optimized version of that playbook, where Kamala Harris campaigned more with Liz Cheney than her own running mate, where she talked all about how Dick Cheney has endorsed me for president, She had generals. She had the keynote speakers on night 4 of the DNC were retired generals and secretaries of defense. She talked about building the US military into the most lethal fighting force on earth. Lost all 7 swing states. Nobody wants to hear Bush 04 nonsense. Literally nobody.
But that's not why she lost. That's not why she lost those swing states.
No, it's not 100% why she lost. But if the focus of your campaigning is a very tiny slice of the electorate, then you leave out a much bigger slice. And to your point, Mike, about Trump not bringing in new voters, he does. We have to reckon with the fact that Trump has changed everything we know about elections. For the first, when I was a child up to when I was about 18 years old, so the 2016 cycle, the conventional wisdom was that Democrats did really well in high turnout races and Republicans did really well in low turnout ones. So Democrats did great in presidential races and terribly in midterms, right? Look at 2008, which was one of the highest turnout elections in history. Democrats won 60 Senate seats and 250, I think, House seats, something ridiculous like that. And then in midterms, lost their House majority and lost like 8 Senate seats. 2012 election, they win back like 6 of those Senate seats that they lost. And then in 2014, they lose another like 9 of them. 10 years later, Trump dominates, and Trump is really good at bringing in people who are not really inclined to vote, but are more inclined to lean conservative. Trump brings in new people all the time. In the 2 highest turnout presidential elections in history, he vastly outperformed expectations in one of them, and he won the second one outright in what was the best presidential performance for a Republican in 20 years. When you talk about Glenn Youngkin in Virginia, that was the highest turnout gubernatorial election in Virginia's history. Compare that to midterms, which are significantly lower turnout, we suddenly see Democrats picking up Senate seats and only barely losing the House in a cycle where the president is polling at 35% approval. Things have switched around. Democrats have become a lot more engaged than we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. Republicans have become a little less engaged, but know to show up for the Super Bowl versus the regular season. There were a whole lot of people in 2024 who voted in 2020 and chose for Joe Biden specifically in 2020 and chose their couches in 2024. We have to acknowledge that. We have to ask why that is. And most importantly, we have to recognize that there is a large base of people that we can pivot to and appeal to without talking about the deficit, the military, and George Bush.
Well,
so I'm not the terms conservative can get thrown around and mean a lot of different things. I don't want to pick it apart too much, but from my perspective, I don't think Trump necessarily brings in the conservative voter. Certainly not a conservative, say, temperament or disposition. But he has brought in a lot of new voters.
Of partisan affiliation.
Right. If we're talking red state, blue state, left, right, I agree with you. And the reason I'm harping on this point is not because I feel personally offended because I'm a conservative and you're accusing me of that. That's not it. It's that I think what's going on here is Donald Trump has a unique superpower of bringing in those Americans, regardless of the political ideology, who lean far more populist and feel that they have been lied to and betrayed and don't trust the elites, whether or not it's due to COVID, whether or not it's due back all the way to George W. Bush. I mean, the number of Trump supporters who hate Bush as much as they do Biden is that Venn diagram crosses over quite a bit. That's not ideological. That's not party politics. It's not partisanship. That is Trump is of the people, for the people, by the people. This is our guy. As much as bizarre as that might sound, he is at least convincing because he sounds like the crazy uncle you had back at Thanksgiving railing about the federal government. I know this guy. Maybe he's a little quirky, but I can trust him because he's not like all of the other suits in Washington who've been screwing us over for the last 20 years. And so I think that necessarily it confuses things, right? Because we're not just talking about a left v right problem. We're talking about a populist versus elite. And both the left and the right have their populists and their elite. There are healthy versions of populists. There are unhealthy versions of populists, just as there are of the elite or the not elite. We're always going to have populists and elite. But I think that's Trump's superpower, is that he is able to talk to those Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, those young Americans who probably would have never thought of voting Republican in their life, but they see in this guy someone who's at least railing against the people that they perceive as their enemy.
It's not just stability
But he was
either.
the one
Trump
who
was
introduced the concept that they
legitimately
were the enemy.
everywhere. Sorry, go ahead, Reggie. I was just adding in. Trump was
I think
everywhere.
I think what we have to remember, I think we have to remember is Donald Trump was the one who introduced the American enemy. He was the one who brought to the consciousness, right? We rode into the wave of Obama with the horizon that racism was over, that we're in a post-racial America, right? We were given this I live in Oregon, the fentanyl of politics when we got Obama. We were hunched over on the curve of America's politics, and we felt good. We were on a high. And what did Donald Trump do? He started birtherism. He participated in all these digs at Obama, starting his way. And when Obama made his jokes at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, it woke up the original beast of America, that evil monster that we call racism and white supremacy. And so what we've watched is that Donald Trump has leveraged getting a decent electorate behind him using the populace. And unfortunately, if the populist candidate is speaking racist language and hateful and xenophobic and nationalistic ideals, that tells us that the populace shares that ideology. And then we see what happened in the elections. We see that America chose fascism. And so what concerns me is Donald Trump created, marketed, branded, and sent out a whole new toxin into the American psyche and perspective. And so we cannot say that it was the fault of, any particular, it wasn't Nancy Pelosi that injected hatred into the American psyche, but what got the dose that got everything going was Trump's rhetoric on immigrants, on people of color. And we see him trying to re-inject it into the culture today by tokenizing that young cancer survivor and putting him in law enforcement, while at the same moment getting ready to pardon Derek Chauvin. It is an intentional toxicity in the American psyche. So he's leveraging, he's not a populist candidate, but what he is a populist candidate in the sense of he uses the inaccuracies of the rhetoric of the populist community and those who are populist. But it doesn't have anything to do with legislation. He created the boogeyman, and now he gets to be the champion to defeat it.
The thing I want to know, I think we're giving too much credit to Donald Trump, as if the Tea Party movement never happened. I mean, I listen, I'm not trying to take away anything.
I mean, the Tea Party movement was entirely funded by the same rich people who fund Trump, so it's not a total, digression.
No, I'm actually adding to what we're saying here, because I think Donald Trump is not this mastermind that political pundits like to make him out to be. I think he came around at a ripe environment. He tapped into something that was already festering. I think that there was a receptive audience for the birtherism stuff. I think there was a receptive audience for the delegitimization of the first Black president, to be honest with you. I think there was this kind of sort of grievance that the others are coming in and they're taking our seat. I think that all of that was something that predated him. He benefited from it, and he was the person who was able to convey it best unapologetically out of the 17 plus people he was running against in 2016. But that's just to bring back things a little bit close to home. Again, I pointed out that there are 10 Democrats who voted against or voted with Republicans to censor Representative Al Green. Why? I have no clue. But you ask, who are these Democrats? These are Democrats like Representative Swazi. Remember, he took George Santos's seat in the special election that took place recently. You have Representative from Florida, Jared Moskowitz. You have people like that who are benefiting, or somehow they think there's a political benefit to voting for censorship in this situation. Now, what's amazing is the contrast, because while we're asking, where are the Democrats? Where are the people with spines? Right? Does anyone have a spine in the house? Please. Representative Al Green is saying, I will take whatever comes my way because I'm willing to stake whatever, my punishment or what my well-being politically on people, their attention being drawn to the fact that Medicare is on the chopping block here. They have the numbers here, right? This is not like the first term. Despite the very slim majority in the House, they have, it seems as if Speaker Mike Johnson has more of a control over the caucus than Kevin McCarthy did. And Donald Trump is in control. And, the Affordable Care Act is very much at jeopardy here. Medicare is very much at jeopardy here. And other programs that people have come to enjoy are in jeopardy here. And that's why there was a memo that went out telling Republicans, discouraging them from going into more town hall meetings. Because people, just like in 2019, 2018, 2017, are finding out that the people that voted for them are getting angry when they realizing the floor is about to be taken from under them, that the benefits that they've been enjoying are about to be stripped away. And this is something that I have no clue why Democrats decided to align themselves rather than sit back and watch Republicans defend the indefensible.
Well, that's easy. Those guys are in swing states. Swing districts.
Not all of them. Not all of them. Tom Shelby's district is 8 points more Democratic than the rest of the country. In a good year, Democrats win that district by 12 points. In a bad year, they win it by 4. Well, some of these people are in safe districts. Laura Gillen, whose district is Hempstead, Freeport, Baldwin, Roosevelt on Long Island, full of educated Black people. That's not a swing district. That's not a district Democrats want to lose.
When was the last time a Republican had that seat? Roughly.
This last Congress, but he also won that thanks to Kathy Hochul running the worst governor campaigns we've ever seen.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
underperforming on Long Island. These people are not vulnerable battleground. By and large, most of them are not vulnerable battleground Democrats, especially if you're expecting 2026 to be a 2018 level Democratic victory. There's no excuse for these people signing on to it. The fact of the matter is that this is a failure of organizational leadership. It starts with Hakeem Jeffries telling Democrats not to protest the State of the Union. And it continues with Senate Democrats telling Hakeem Jeffries, aren't you embarrassed? This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. Democrats are too obsessed with acting nice and proper. The world's already on fire. The base is ready for you to fight. The base has given you billions of dollars to fight against someone who you've told them is an existential threat to the nation. So for someone to actually stand up and say, I'm not going to let this happen, sitting down, and you sign on with the other people to say, I think that was bad and you should be punished. It's absurd. It's frankly absurd. And all 10 of these people should be looking over their shoulders for a primary in the next cycle.
Well, it sounded like you described a swing district, whether it was a strong swing district or but it sounded like it was a seat that Republicans.
These are not swings. Fundamentally, in 2022, Long Island Democrats were hurt by the fact that the Republican nominee for governor was a Long Islander who campaigned on every inch of Long Island, and the Democratic nominee was a woman from Buffalo who very rarely liked to be seen south of Albany, New York.
All right, here's my point, I guess. Al Green's seat could not possibly be won by a Republican in under any circumstances. Okay, Al Green's seat could not possibly be won by a Republican under any set of circumstances, and there are a whole lot
on
of
that seat whose seats could not be won by a Republican. Jim Himes represents Bridgeport, Connecticut, in Congress. That seat is 12 points more Democratic than the country. In a bad year, Democrats win that district by 12. In a good, they win it by 25.
Any white guy is in a swing district. I don't care what you say. Any white Democrat can be beaten by a Republican. Any white Democrat can be beaten by a Republican. That's just political reality. Guys like that. Jim, those are dinosaurs. There are no white Democrats in the South anymore. There are none. There are none. There are none. So it's like, but I think Reginald was again on point with in relation to the Donald Trump being able to exploit the racist undercurrent that is always existent in American politics. I mean, that's just Donald Trump is really the price that we paid for Obama. Donald Trump represented, and he represents white supremacy. That's what he represents. That is his calling card. That's why he gets away with what he gets away with. That's it. He blatantly, openly represents white supremacy. I mean, my frustration is that nobody can say that. nobody seemingly can say that. Or as nobody is willing to say that. None of the talking heads, you don't hear MSNBC, these people on MSNBC just saying it. Everybody knows it's true. Everybody knows it's true. Nobody denies it. Nobody can deny that the days of plausible deniability are over. That game is finished. That game is finished. I mean, Donald Trump, everybody knows that, politically, he made his bones with the birtherism hoax. Everybody knows that the Nixon administration sued him and his father for racial discrimination against Black people. Everybody knows about the full page ad. He paid for, calling for the death of the execution of the Central Park Five. Everybody knows all of this stuff. So it's like, so this is what he represents, and this is what populism now means. This is what it means.
I do want to push back with respect, because this is about what I was saying earlier. Look, there are 330 million of us Americans running around, so I have no doubt you can find individuals who that is true. That is their impetus, say, for supporting Trump. I know a ton of Trump supporters. I live around them. I go to church with them. I mean, that's my family. Those are people I work with. They don't like George W. Bush. They hated McCain. They hated Mitt Romney. This has nothing to do with race with them. They think the Republican Party was on the wrong track, and Trump was the guy who got it right. And I'm not saying that there aren't I'm not in any way defending Trump's racial overtones. What I'm saying,
they were on the wrong track. How was George W. Bush on the wrong track? And with these people you're talking about,
Iraq and Afghanistan predominantly, they blame him somewhat for his response to the 2008 market collapse, and quite frankly, they blame him for Barack Obama. They think he screwed it up in the eyes of the American people so much that we ended up with, again, this is not my view, a radical Islamist,
a Black president. We ended up with a Black president.
Look, and so I guess what I'm trying to say let me put it this way. I'm trying to help you.
No, I want to hear truth. I want to hear you tell me the truth.
You can see in the United States that it's not just the lens of racism. Again, I'm not denying that happens, but that is not the full explanation as to how Trump has gotten his power. Those people who voted for Donald Trump do not like the Republican establishment for the exact same reason, and it has nothing to do with their race.
But you cannot like them.
Played into that. I'll tell you why. I'm sitting here in Oregon watching. I was heavy on getting Kamala elected. I worked so hard, I didn't realize that Hispanic men that I love and care about, that are my friends and colleagues who are church members, were falling off the wayside, hemorrhaging those votes, right? I think when the Republican Party, to your point, needed a change after Bush, rather than after Obama got elected the first time, they were trying to figure out what was happening. We had the Tea Party, of course, and all those things, but they went into a type of hibernation, and they focused on messaging and branding. And the Democrats did not do that because we were so worried about this big, scary boogeyman of Trump. And I think one of the failing points of the party, getting back to the point about why this happened and how, and even how Al Green is being censured in Democrats, the Democrats never rested and focused. The Republicans, to their credit, focused on some things. You have those southern states with the 7 Mountain Mandates and all the different philosophies and structures that they wanted to put in place. They put in the work on the grassroots. They grew their crop. And what they also sowed along that journey was putting in the deceptive nature of all the things we're seeing in the political zeitgeist, they also deceived the younger generation. They deceived the low data voters, the emotionalism that America has moved into, that we get jerked around by our media and the rise of social media. And so when you have this new electorate that was cultivated into the 2016 election, we stood no chance because we did not go into a focused, strategy-driven party hibernation like the Republicans were able to. And so they're reaping the benefit of the focus that they put into place. The Democrats didn't do that. And what we as Democrats, as a member of the Oregon Democratic Party, what we have done is just rested on the Obama laurels. That's why we ran Kamala Harris. That's why we did the same playbook. We had Joe Biden. Joe Biden's president in a sense. We run the next person in line. I promise you, if Kamala would have won and would have won a second term, we would be sitting with Tim Walz, being excited about him and Hope and the rest of them going into the White House. We play the same playbook. We haven't had the big reset. And I hope that we'll take this time to reset, but we won't because we are so focused, right? And this is the toxicity of what we saw with happen to Representative Green, Al Green. What happened is this. He's doing what Black women and other Black digital creators said they weren't going to do. He spoke up and protested. We have to get to the point of giving people what they asked for when they asked for it. And I think what happened last night or 2 nights ago with the joint session and then the later subsequent vote to censure, the Democrats spent more time standing in the well to have his back than they did standing up during the speech. Because it's that blue bracelet culture in the Democratic Party where we perform when the cameras are on us, but then we glad hand, kick back, and enjoy the trappings of our elected office while the American people rot on the vine. And I think if we don't reset, we'll see more of the Black community's leaders being primaried and the progressive states, their representatives being challenged because the American people are tired of the same playbook. When the Republicans were tired of the like to your point earlier, it was the focus point. We were going to fix our party because we'll never have another Black man in the White House. And then they focused, and now we have the country that was created because of the focus. And the party, Democrats are like sheep. If we hit them hard enough, they'll scatter, and the whole herd will go. That's the way that the Democratic mindset is. And if we don't move past that, we'll repeat the same cycle. So get ready for Kamala Harris 2028 running with Tim Walz and Tim Walz in the next generation and going forward because we don't learn from our mistakes.
Let me ask Josh a question. With your, the Republicans, and the conservatives, and those in your circle, don't you honestly believe that when they think of Democrats, when they think of the left, they're thinking of, you're voting for Black people, you're voting for gays, you're voting for
DEI.
Yeah. I mean, DEI. That's just Black
DEI.
people.
Yeah.
That's just Black. So don't they have a general perception of the Democratic Party and the left as you're voting for Black people? Just be honest, man.
I understand what you're saying, but let me start off by saying I think this is a human tendency. I don't think it has anything to do with left or right. I think we humans tend to attribute to the out group uniformity and to the group we're a part of a lot of diversity. Because quite frankly, it's hard for me to answer that question. Yeah, I know people like that. I know a lot of people who would not be described that way, but would hold similar, say, political leanings. I think that, look, if you just mean in a simple sense of more Black Americans vote Democrat than Republican, I don't think that's an undeniable truth. But if you mean, do they think of Democrats as you have to be Black or gay or a feminist or something to that degree? It depends on who you talk to. It really does. There are yes, some of those just listen to talk radio Republicans that is their view of a Democrat. I've never met a Democrat. I've also seen many Republicans that have a very well-developed and complex view of the left and have a lot of respect for the left, even as they disagree with them, because they oftentimes it's individuals who have lived with people of a differing view. That really, I think, and that's why I think it does a lot to sharpen you when you are forced to live in an area where you don't agree with everybody, because it turns out people are really complicated.
Right, but I'm just talking about the rank and file, the rank and file generally. I know there are enlightened people like yourself, and there are a lot of, there are a lot of Liz Cheney type, who are just principled economic conservatives, and but when they see fascism, they know it, and they're not. I know there's a lot of anti-Trumpers or never Trumpers. I understand that, but I'm just saying, the average rank and file person who just culturally, they're just they see the Democrats as the other team. It's like a tribal thing. They see the Democrats as kind of those are the minorities. Those are the isn't that the general zeitgeist, the general perception?
I mean, I understand what you're asking, and I'm
well,
not
then answer the question.
Because I don't know how. I'm not trying to evade it. No, honestly, I do not see it as you're describing it. Now, again, yes, those people do exist, but my experience with most Republicans is they don't see Democrats as a fringe other, if you will. Now, if they see the National Party that way, they would definitely say, like, Kamala Harris or anybody in sort of a standing position of that nature is a threat to the democracy, if you will. And we see this sort of mirrored sometimes in the Democratic saying the same of the Republicans. But I don't see that there's a sort of desire or even temptation to constantly see Democrats as individuals who are the other, from a racial standpoint.
Josh, can I ask you a question? I'm curious.
Uh-huh.
So for this, we'll just call the fictional imaginary Republican that we are talking about here. Does that Republican feel comfortable with the current president saying that the enemy within, or the enemy is journalists, the enemy is diversity, equity, inclusion, the enemy is Black and brown people? Is this or even crazy enough, the Democrat is the enemy? Whatever that Democrat shapeshifts and forms into, that's the enemy? Is this Republican that we're talking about here, this idealistic, the type of Republican I would want to get a beer with, right? That type of Republican.
Right. Yeah, just a normal person.
Can you describe the trait of that Republican? Like, help me understand who that is, because I can't find them.
Well, I don't, to the best of my knowledge, and I hate when I'm in a position I feel like I'm defending Donald Trump, because I am not. I cannot stand the guy. But I don't, he may have implied things, but even I don't know if you're referring to the enemy being the Black or the brown people. I don't know that that's necessarily a fair, explicit, justification. Yeah. Now, the idea of the enemy being journalists, especially those who go after the Trump administration, or the immigrant. Okay, yeah, there's some fairness there. I think, or rather, in my experience, most of them would very sharply not see that as fascist baiting or whistleblowing. They would see it as, well, of course he doesn't mean Black or brown people. Or, of course, when we talk about the enemy within, he means those elitist journalists who are trying to undermine his administration. In other words, they will simultaneously see themselves as defenders of the First Amendment, while yes, we agree with Trump on this particular point. I'm not advocating that position. I guess I'm just saying that these are individuals who do not align themselves with fascist, racist, misogynistic views, and see that in Trump. They would say that when he says those things, that's not what he means.
Mike, I want to say, Josh has taught me something very, very important today. I did not know that Republicans were able to compartmentalize and really take a nuanced approach. That is learning for me today, because when I have heard Republicans talk about the issues, the steak and potatoes issues, it has always devolved into the drain the swamp, the elite, all of these immigrants coming to our country. So it's interesting. So what prevents the Republican Party's, idealistic voter to say enough is enough? We want you out. What prevents? What causes them to continue on rooting, voting, showing up for a person who is not George Bush, who is not Ronald Reagan, who is not any of the most ideal Republican candidate.
Mm-hmm.
What prevents them from saying enough is enough and we want something different?
I think Bush, right or wrong, Bush, McCain, and Romney were seen more than anything else as losers. Individuals who, in spite of their maybe more honorable characteristics, could not ultimately deliver at the end of the day. Right or wrong, and I'm not saying that Donald Trump has won in all ways in which these candidates lost. Obviously, McCain and Romney lost in their elections. But Trump is perceived as someone who can, in fact, deliver. And there is oftentimes, it's not uncommon for somebody to talk about, I love what Donald Trump is doing. And then a few minutes later say, I wished he wouldn't tweet as much. You know, and so it's sort of a tacit like, yeah, he's not the best guy, but at least he's not the best guy. And I think it's kind of an odd coming to terms with, maybe this is the best we can get, but at least he's finally winning. At least he's delivering for us, if you will.
And just like, you know, Josh, what you conveyed is exactly the point I was making about the difference between Republicans and Democrats. You know, while they're able to overlook the standard bearers, many negative factors. For instance, you know, last week he inadvertently criticized a trade agreement he himself signed. He expressed outrage over the financial burdens imposed on Americans by the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement that he signed in his first term, saying, who would ever sign a thing like this? I mean, if this was Biden, Democrats would stand by and let the headlines write themselves. Biden's mental decline on full display. Confused president forgets his own actions. Now, the Republicans are able to just move on and press on forward, right? That to me is one of the many things that causes my blood pressure to raise when I think about this thing, because you know I had Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project on. This just shows you the difference of how the Republicans think versus Democrats. This is a lifelong Republican, someone who still considers himself a Republican like you, Josh, and he thinks like that Trump hijacked his party. I think that's the basis for why you started your podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It is just, in all fairness, Rick Wilson and I do not see eye to eye on many things as much as we're both Republicans who are not for Donald Trump. But
that's where you agree is my point. And he said, look, for the next 4 years, our goal is to tank his poll numbers. That's our goal. So while Democrats are voting for Marco Rubio, like Nate pointed out, because well, he's the most sane person we've seen. I mean, when you compare him with like Sakash Patel, I mean, he is a regular Republican. I mean, while they're voting for censorship for one of their own, for simply standing up and calling out a fact, Donald Trump did not have a mandate. In fact, he won by less of a margin than Obama won twice. He lost in less of a margin than Biden won in 2020. No one was running around talking about how they had strong mandates. While they're doing that, Republicans are steamrolling ahead to the next thing. You had in the Oval Office last week, the French president literally had to physically grab the arm of Donald Trump, interrupt him while Donald Trump was in the middle of saying that the loan that was given to Ukraine, that the money that was given to Ukraine by Europe was a loan, and he had to interject him and stop him. The very next day, the British Prime Minister also has to interject and stop the presidents in the same room, in the same chairs. And do you hear anything about Trump's mental state? Do you hear anything about him not being all there? Do you hear anything about these things at all? No. Why? Because they understand that at the end of the day, this is our person. This is our champion. We're going to get behind him. And, to heck with it. We're just going to run him for as long as he can go. And we're going to get the next person when they're done. That's the difference between how Republicans, Democrats think. Democrats need to adopt how Republicans think about the polling. I'm not saying they need to, just lower their standards. What I'm saying is, this is about politics. Okay, we're not going to sit there and say, well, go back to the constituents. Well, I did join with Republicans to censor Al Green. No, I voted for your Medicare, right? And that meant voting against this particular nominee. That meant taking a strong principled stance despite whatever happens to me politically. That's what Democrats are not doing.
Mike, the reason they can't do it, the reason why they don't do it is because, and I've stated this before, they're playing the Democratic Party is playing an inherently weak hand. They're playing a weak hand because 60% of white people are going to vote for Republicans no matter what. So it's an inherently weak hand. I mean, so they have to run an inside straight or whatever in order to win national elections and in many cases statewide elections. I mean, and so my question, that's why I was trying to get to Josh. Why is it that 60% of white people, do that? But I mean, I think I know, and I think he knows. But I mean, and also the Republicans also have a better apparatus for discipline. And by that I mean they have this right-wing radio propaganda apparatus. They have the Fox network and Sean Hannity and people like that. And if the stink gets on you as a Republican office holder by one of those guys, you will be primaried and you will be defeated. You will be primaried and you will be defeated. You're gone. If Sean Hannity and people like that get on your trail, if you have gone offline, it started with Rush Limbaugh. It's like
in 2014, he was the House Majority Leader getting primaried by a nobody in 2014. To your point,
right? So so they have this automatic disciplinary. This is what keeps them in line now. And all Trump has to do now is put the stink on them, and they're gone. They don't have to worry about a general election. They're gone in the primary. So I mean, to me, this is a tough nut to crack. I mean, but we have to face political reality. The Democrats play an inherently weak hand. And then they make it weaker. The Democrats make it weaker by going, off the rails, sort of unnecessarily on some of these cultural issues. And I'm speaking specifically with reference to transgender stuff. It's like, bathrooms and or more importantly, sports. There's no reason to champion that politically. There's no reason.
There's no reason to champion banning abortion politically either. And
right,
there are 5.
Wait. Say that again. Say that again, Nathan.
There's no reason to champion banning abortion politically either. It's a losing issue for Republicans to the point where they have to. Glenn Youngkin staked his entire political future on moderately banning abortion, and he turned into a lame duck governor because of it. There's no reason to champion a lot of things that the GOP is championing, including banning Medicaid, by the way, which they are still hell-bent on doing. But if it makes your base happy, sometimes you have to go for it.
The Virginia governor is lame duck anyway. Isn't he? I mean,
by convention of the fact that governors of Virginia can't run for re-election, but he staked the second half of his term on his ability to message well on moderate conservative abortion policy, and it blew up in his face.
But the evangelical right is the evangelical right is the base. The evangelical right is the base of the Republican Party. It's the base. They can't run away from their base on that issue. That's the base of the party.
If I can clarify this, unfortunately, I hate to throw my expertise in here, but when it comes to the abortion issue for people of faith, specifically evangelical Christians, that is not the dog is wagging the tail and not the tail wagging the dog. The tail being the evangelical Christian base. The Republican Party introduced abortion into the diet stream of evangelical Christians under the Reagan era. And so
because they couldn't win off of opposing integrating schools anymore.
Exactly. And so when Roe v. Wade was overturned, that did fracture a strong base, but they had already reintroduced a new supplement, a new dietary supplement called nationalism. And so we didn't have to worry about that shift. At the same time, we saw Roe v. Wade get flipped. Nationalism started to have its strong and take its first big steps in growing into this country, a part of this country's identity. And so I don't want to get to encourage the narrative of that somehow abortion was a bad running point. It is a ideal that was held, and it's still something that many progressive Democrats that have moved from, or not progressive, moderate to conservative Democrats still held, who came over because they didn't like Trump, still hold to a very high standard the area of abortion. They may not agree fully with the Democratic Party's perspective on that, but they came over. But what hemorrhaged was the fact that this candidate went from pro-choice to ceased to be pro-choice. And so I don't think that saying that abortion, that argument
Reggie,
can hold
there are
up.
two anti-abortion, there are three two anti-abortion candidates who have won a majority of the popular vote, 50+1, in the past 30 years. One of them is George W. Bush, the other is his father. That's it. Banning abortion isn't the winner that the media isn't. Abortion is not a 50-50 issue the way the mainstream media likes to pretend it is. It's not a wedge issue the way the Republicans have turned it into. They hit it because it makes their base excited, not because it's actually a winning policy. Now, exciting your base can be a winning strategy, but that does not make what you are promoting winning policy. The Republicans
also a
base
foundation.
is excited about banning Medicaid. That doesn't mean it's winning policy. You can't actually run for president saying, I'm going to ban Medicaid.
But when you build it as a part of your foundation, you don't need to worry about the evangelicals anymore because they're one voter issues. And so they're locked in. They're going to the polls. We got to save babies. Like
Right.
They're not worried about anything else. That's their primary focus. And so then all of the other distractionary
But that's not a big enough slice of the electorate to actually flip elections.
Yeah, it's not.
Not
No,
People who are single
upset
issue
about
voters,
Joe Biden's
people
positioning.
who are single voters on abortion are not a big enough to actually flip elections. We've seen this. We've seen
when
this
they're faith
before because
tradition-
anti-abortion candidates don't usually win national elections.
But you get them to show up so you can have crazy Uncle Timmy, right? He's already locked. He's going to float along too, but the base has already been established and it becomes a foundation. So if you're stripping out one of the legs of your voter base, that becomes a recipe for disaster. And so because you've already put it into the mindset that you are pro states having control over the conversation of abortion, that isn't still even good enough. People are hard and fast, especially when you come from a faith tradition that is very rule-centric, patriarchal, and oftentimes bigoted. And so when that happens,
I acknowledge all of that, but abortion is not the big winner for Republicans that the media pretends it is. It's a red meat issue for their base, yes, but it's not an actual electoral winner when you scale it to a national scale.
But Nathan, it's part of it.
On red meat.
It's part of what makes that right. That foundation, it's part of what makes that 60% so solid. It's a big part of. Yeah, it's a big part of that.
It's like with the broccoli and the vegetables.
Right. I mean, anytime a Democrat running for president can get as much as 43% of the white vote, he cannot lose. He or she cannot lose. If you can get as much as 43%, I don't think Obama ever got 43% in winning the popular vote twice. So it's, that's what I'm saying. It's, they keep that 60% solid partially because of these cultural wedge issues that Democrats needlessly run on. There's no upside. You're going to get black women anyway.
What's the upside on Medicaid? What's the upside on banning Medicaid or cutting Social Security?
Because black and brown people have been turned into the boogeyman by the base. And so now it's like, oh, we don't want all these people. And that's why even Doge exists. They're trying
they
to
needed a new
find
punching bag, and the new
ban
punching
to be
bag was
upset
trans
about.
people. That's what they needed, a new punching bag. The punching bag was trans people. You really think that when they're done getting rid of trans people, they're leaving your black ass alone?
Okay, let me interject.
Of course
here.
not.
Let me interject here. Listen, even to beyond the point of abortion, my point earlier was that even now, Nate talked about, we had campaign commercials. No, we need to have town hall meetings, and predominantly, to your point, Mr. Stephen Voss, we need to have town hall meetings. The DNC chair needs to have press conferences, town hall meetings, campaign events, rallies in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, McDowell, Kentucky, Huntington, West Virginia, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Detroit, Michigan, Scranton, Pennsylvania. And they need to educate people that Biden on January 5th of this year signed the Social Security Fairness Act, which was a bipartisan measure that was aimed at increasing Social Security payments. They need to go to these places and talk about how that crumbling bridge in your city that's been crumbling for years is now going to get some kind of makeover thanks to the American Rescue Plan. That is assuming that Donald Trump's executive order Holt does not affect that in any way. They need to go into these places and convey to the people that the CHIPS and Science Act are going to start revitalizing the economies of their cities. They need to make the connection that they have a vested interest in this thing, because if they don't, they are going to run to these social issues. They are going to run to these boogeymen that we've been alluding to. And that's why making it about their pocketbook, making it about something tangible is key to winning over these people. And even now, the work has to be done. In 2025, we've got off-year elections. I think there's one in Florida, or two in Florida. We've got 2026 coming. We've got gubernatorial elections this year in New Jersey and in Virginia. This is a crucial time to be conveying that message. And even now, I think time is being wasted. We're in March. We can't wait until the summer to make the case. We have to make it now.
Yeah, I agree that the class warfare argument, the class warfare is the way to go. I mean, that's always been the way to go, in my opinion. And if Bernie Sanders was, 60 years old, with hair, he would be our guy. He would be our guy. There's no question. Because that populism makes sense to everybody. It riles up the, conservatives, because anything that smacks of socialism and anything called socialism, was a loser. But I don't think it's a loser anymore. Anyway, go ahead.
They need to make the case. Look, why are billionaires like Elon Musk sitting in the White House determining your tax policies? To me, this just goes the question out there. Right. Why are people like Jeff Bezos getting away with golden parachutes? Why are they getting away with golden parachutes? Why do they have offshore Cayman Island accounts?
Because Democrats and Republicans have the same donors. Until we end Citizens United, and rid big money out of politics, which unfortunately was a bipartisan accomplishment. Democrats and Republicans were both all too happy to roll over for corporate interests, 30, 45 years ago. Until we get that out of the way, then we're not going to be able to say billionaires, we shouldn't let billionaires have a say in government policy unless elected. And to your earlier point, Mike, I would love a 50-state strategy. I would absolutely love one. When you expand your map, you have much better odds of winning, right? You look at this past cycle, for example, where we shrunk our map down to 7 states, lost all 7 of them. Trump expanded his map. He was campaigning everywhere, New York, California, states he wouldn't even win. Trump had one of the best Republican performances in New York in history. He depressed Democratic turnout in California well enough that he won the popular vote, and he swept all 7 swing states because he was not, sticking himself to one little area of the map. You look at 2004, where the
Nathan, he also got $300 million from one donor.
Well, yeah, he's also insanely wealthy, but he also had a bigger map to play with. So you have much more things.
He had $300 million from one donor.
And Kamala raised $1 billion from a bunch of other people. Money does not have to be the only determinant. But you look at the 2004 election, before I get off this point, where the map was just Ohio and Florida, we lost both of those states. We need a bigger map. So yes, I'd love a 50-state strategy, but we have to be mindful of who we're targeting. I think targeting Trump voters at this point is a fool's errand and a colossal waste of money, because at this point, we have to know who's baked in and who's not. So instead of targeting Trump voters, start targeting the non-voters. Look at the people who voted in 2020 who didn't vote in 2024. Look at the people who voted in 2008 and whose voices have been absent from the political scene ever since, right? Reggie's pointed this out much earlier in this show. People want stability, right? And I think a lot of politicians on both sides, but largely Democrats, confuse stability with the way things were before, right? But people don't want to go back to the way things were, before. They don't want to go back to the just back to normal. They want stability and right. They don't want things to be tinkered around the edges, right? Josh, earlier you said that people blame Bush for messing up so badly that during the war on terror, we got a black president named Barack Hussein Obama. People thought Obama was going to bring a much more change than he ended up bringing. People expected, and relative to the seats to the Congress that Obama was sworn in with, and the Democratic coalition looked a lot different in 2008. I will, fully acknowledge that you, even if you had 60 votes in the Senate and 250 in the House, you maybe had 45 on protecting abortion and 210 in the House. Relative to the Congress Obama had, people were expecting an FDR level presidency, or at the very least, Lyndon Johnson level presidency. They didn't get that. And so when Hillary Clinton came along running on how she was going to be a third Obama term, people said, no, I don't want more of this. I want something different. Give me the bankrupt reality TV show host who, does whatever he wants. At least he'll shake something up and we'll see what happens. And then in 2020, we were like, okay, maybe we can't have this anymore. We'll try Joe Biden because at least he's vaguely electable. And then Joe Biden won and said nothing is fundamentally going to change. He actually, I do have to mention, when Joe Biden was early in his term and passing the American Rescue Plan and jacking up and boosting up the child tax credit and talking about paid family leave and having the best numbers of his presidency, people were like, okay, maybe Joe Biden is just okay, but we're willing to put up with just okay compared to what we just, escaped from. And then he turned away from all of that, pivoted towards the center, made his entire second half of his presidency about Ukraine. And people said, you know what, we're not having any more of this, more of the same, but let's go back to the guy who called in a hit squad to the Capitol, because at least, again, things will be different. Stability and the way things were before are not necessarily the same thing. And I think Democrats confuse the two a lot, which is why we get so much when Bush was president and when Reagan was president nonsense. People didn't like the way things were when Bush and Reagan were president, which is why we got a black president named Barack Hussein Obama in the war on terror. They wanted something different. So we cannot keep pushing Democrats who are running on tinkering around the edges and expecting that to be a winning solution for an electorate that increasingly wants bigger and better. And Trump, for all of his faults, promises bigger and better to his base. What do we promise? An earned income tax credit? Who knows what that is?
No, wait a minute. This is revisionist. This is revisionist history that doesn't. It's not even real. I mean, Obamacare was a big effing deal. It was a big deal, and I don't know how you can just
Democrats passed Obamacare and immediately stopped talking about it. They didn't talk
That's
about
all they could do. They got wiped out after that. They got wiped out in 2014, Nathan.
Their numbers. They didn't.
They got wiped out.
Same thing. We're doing.
Okay.
When Trump won in 2016, there were people who didn't know the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare were the same piece of legislation. They said, I am so glad Trump is getting rid of Obamacare so that we can just have the Affordable Care Act. That's the
Nate, they knew enough to protest against it in town halls. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. Look, we're oversimplifying things, Nate. First of all, Obama, when Obama was inaugurated, the Republicans were meeting at a local restaurant on how to make him a one-term president. And that's what I've been talking about this entire night. There is a difference between Republicans and Democrats in the way they approach government, of the way they approach politics. The Democrats are still looking for ways to somehow run back to their base and say, I worked with the Republicans. No, Mitch McConnell did not care. All of these Republicans did not. Mitch McConnell was barely hanging on in the 2008 election. In fact, many were expecting him to lose that race. So this notion that, Biden wasn't promising anything was going to change. No, we were going through a global pandemic that took more lives than all of the recent wars we've experienced combined. Biden was promising to stop that. The current administration took us out the World Health Organization, lied to us saying that COVID was going to mysteriously go away by spring. Didn't happen. He himself got COVID. on the debate stage, there was chaos. NBA games were canceled, events were canceled, people were complaining, I can't breathe because I'm wearing a mask. That's what Biden was campaigning against. And Hillary Clinton was campaigning on the fact that, look, it's me or incompetency, right? It wasn't no third Obama term. Look, we've got real security issues in this country. There's me, and then there's the person who has absolutely no government experience whatsoever, right? And so I think while we're making these assessments, it's important to remember that, Democrats have produced. Okay, we're
yes,
acting.
they have produced, but you look at the 2016 election.
Over the past 4 years, between 2021 and 2025, Democrats have produced more bipartisan legislation
And that's the
any
problem.
administration in
Yes.
the year 2000. And my point is that, while I do concede to your point that people need to know about it, yes, that's why I'm saying go into these places and convey to people the same way people were standing up yelling at their Republican congressman, the way that they were doing right here in Georgia last week, to the point where now there's a memo going around saying, oh, we may not want to have town hall meetings now, guys, between now and whenever the next election is. We may want to stay in Washington or stay in your office, but don't have town hall meetings because we don't want to be yelled at with our constituents. There's a reason why those things happen.
They're happening at
And there's
Democratic
also a
ones as
reason
well.
that these union white households that strongly voted for Democrats in every election in 2016 said, I am tired of Democrats giving me a big bag of nothing, and turned around and voted for Trump. It didn't matter that they got the Affordable Care Act to cut their healthcare premiums.
Is the
They
one
still
giving the
turned
big
around
bag
and
of-
voted for
Promise you all, where is-
something
he promised you
new.
that
Mike,
it's the
people
big
want
bag.
something new. They're tired
But
of
even
It's the big
being
bag of
turned around the edges
And
too.
Democrats need to make that case.
Mike,
What in the heck?
They do
What is
need
wrong with these people?
They do need to make the
Big
case,
bag
but
of
the
nothing.
case
You
cannot
got
only
infrastructure.
the,
You
the
got
case
COVID
cannot only
relief.
be made.
Unemployment has been at a record level, low. Crime, lowest in 50 years. And we're going to talk about big bag of nothing. Infrastructure, you got tangible. You've been promised infrastructure week for how long? You finally got it. And we're going to talk about Trump as Biden, the Democrats are a big bag of nothing. We have produced more.
I don't know how you think the Democrats could have done any more than they did
And
in
they
these
did it
last
with
two
their
Democrats.
hands tied behind
That's
their
what I
back.
want to hear. How could they have done it?
They did it with their hands tied behind their back.
That's what I'm
The
saying.
Republicans were stopping to the point where they were willing to pass an immigration bill written by Josh's senator that had no Democratic items in there whatsoever. And it
That
didn't
they still
pass.
defend, by the way, and that's a problem too. But
Mike,
when you look at the 2016 election, right, you have these historically ancestrally Democratic households that will vote for a yellow dog before they vote for a Republican, that suddenly turn around and back Trump.
No.
It's not
Those households did not exist. Their yellow dog households do not. That's not. Michigan. Those people. Are you talking about those people like in Michigan, in Pennsylvania?
You look at towns like Eau Claire, Wisconsin, right, that Hillary Clinton got decimated in, that Democrats were, slowly declining in, but able to keep up enough to make up for it in Milwaukee.
That's my point. They were always slowly declining.
But the Democrats were able to keep up enough of these numbers instead of losing them all at once because they were tired of feeling like they got more of the same, right? We have to acknowledge Obama came in with the worst economy since the Great Depression, right? And yes, while he did deliver economic recovery, enough people did not feel it by the end of his second term for it to make a difference, which is why when Trump inherited a red-hot economy and got to sit on cruise control while he cut taxes for the wealthy, people thought, okay, we have a good economy under Trump. It must be because Trump created the economy. And yes, there are messaging failures, most specifically the fact that the Democrats dismantle their messaging operation after every election.
But didn't you just contradict yourself? Didn't you just say you said there was a red hot Trump had inherited a red hot economy,
yes.
And then you said, but just prior to that, you said that the people didn't feel the economy.
People did not feel the Obama economy's recovery, by and large.
Well, how could that be? Wait a minute. How can it be red hot and you're not feeling
fire and others aren't?
Exactly.
That's
the
issue with Obama.
You
what happened?
Look at the deal Obama
there are
made
people
with
who
Silicon
believe
Valley.
that Obama's economy wasn't for them.
Right.
And so it pivoted, and when companies were moving their operations overseas, that was affecting the same people in those Rust Belt and in the Midwest And those areas, they didn't feel, and this is the problem with the Democratic messaging, we're so worried about feeling and virtue signaling that we're not able to communicate the reality. But people were so worried about what they were feeling. They were feeling like Obama turned their back on the working class Americans, that they were focused too much. And so again, but it comes back to the original issue that there was messaging that failed for the Democrats after Obama took office and after Obama left office. That was the issue.
I think had Biden run in 2016, he would have won.
Oh, absolutely. I don't have any.
That belies everything that's been said. That belies everything that's been said.
Historically nominee, but Biden spent most of his time. Biden would have spent more time on the campaign trail engaging with these communities than Hillary Clinton did, who never even visited Wisconsin and spent most of her money on boosting turnout in Chicago.
Hillary ran a bad campaign.
It exposed a lot of structural weaknesses, right? When you look at a house and see that it has like rotting beams and stuff, it exposed a lot of rotting beams within the Democratic House.
It's a campaign. It was the candidate, and it was the candidate. It was the candidate.
Can I address one of those rotting beams?
Go ahead.
One of the rotten beams Mike kind of touched on earlier, Nathan. I respect the desire to do what the Republicans are doing, but there's a rotten beam in the House of the Democrats, and that rotten beam is that we are trying again to play the same game. Why are we trying to go and do town halls? I don't want you at a town hall. I want you like Buttigieg on a Republican platform, pushing back and speaking reality.
I don't want you doing that either.
Place. I don't want to see another town hall from another legislator when you won't get in the well like Al Green. If you are not leading we're in the minority. The beam that's wrong is we have cowards in our leadership who are more protected, who are more concerned about being primaried than they are concerned about actually legislating what the American people want. The American people don't care about some of these fringe issues. They care about the things that hurt them in their pockets. They care about their kids' well-being, and regardless of Republican or Democrat. But the issue is we keep getting town halls talking about these fringe issues. We have to do a 50-state strategy, but we also have to kind of take what the American people are telling us by the way they're voting. They don't want the federal government to decide every single piece for them. Fine, give Texas over to the crazies. I don't have to go to Texas. And maybe this is speaking from my bias.
We can't abandon people in Texas, Reggie. There are people in Texas
who
need the federal government.
Right? The reality is we have to start playing by the same playbook that we're countering. And it means that we have to go to places where we have to go do something different. And if you are so worried about a specific issue, then relocate and allow someone like myself who would move to a Texas and advocate for Democratic policies. But we have to start being bespoke in our messaging and in where we choose to show up. I may not like a certain agenda, and so I have to go to a different place where my values align. But we keep trying to change America from the top down and hoping that that's going to fix everything. It's not. The Democrats have to stop trying to go to the local mom and pop shop and sit into a town hall, because that's not speaking to somebody on the other side of the country who wants the thing that you're promising in your location.
Here's the thing. I'm all for whatever method, whatever forum will somehow get across to people, right? Hey, look, Gavin Newsom did a debate against DeSantis last year on Fox. As you pointed out, Buttigieg was on Fox. Kamala Harris was on Fox. Bernie Sanders was on Fox. I think there needs to be more of an intention to go to independent media. I don't think going on Fox really has the intent or the result that we think it's going to have. I think people who are deep into Fox are, that's it, that they're sold, right? I don't think that going in there was really going to change anything much more than I think, Ted Cruz going on MSNBC is going to do anything on that side. But I do, to your point, agree that there needs to be an intentional effort to somehow adapt and change the way things have normally done in terms of how to reach out to people. Hey, if it's a rally, do the rally. If it's going on podcast, do whatever it takes. But be mindful that some of the people on, that are regular audience members of these platforms are very deeply entrenched into these things. And so while we shouldn't just, avoid the effort altogether, keep that in mind that, sometimes it's not going to be as beneficial as we intend. But I do want to, before we land the plane here, talk about, foreign policy a little bit here. I alluded to earlier in the program, the fact that, the leader of the free world, for whatever, however objectively you look at this thing, does not seem to be the president of the United States. I mean, the European countries have all signaled their support for Zelenskyy. The only one really, praising what took place in the Oval Office seems to be those who are gun-ho for Trump here at home. You don't really see anyone outside the United States hailing this as a victory for Trump. Maybe besides Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. But, where do we stand on the world stage as we, as Donald Trump has also announced a pause in Ukraine funding? He's also signaled there's about to be a major policy change or major shift in the way the United States engages with NATO. I'll predict on this show. I believe Donald Trump will start providing intelligence, weapons, and support to Russia before the end of the year. That's my prediction. Any thoughts?
Yeah, right. That's why Tulsi Gabbard is in the position she's in. That's why she's there. I mean, it's like, we are now aligned with Russia, with Putin. Trump is a Putin wannabe, and we are now aligned with Russia. That's what it is. This is Russia West. We're Russia 2.0 or whatever. That's what we are. Trump wants to be like Putin. Trump is probably he is a Putin puppet. He's always been a Putin puppet for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I think he's in the pockets of those oligarchs. I think some of them helped fund him when he was a casino owner or something like that. But I don't know what it is. I don't have any proof. But all I know is he is a Putin puppet, and it's obvious. It's always been obvious. And so now the United States is no longer part of that NATO alliance. It's no longer part of that NATO alliance. It's just it might be de jure, but it's definitely not de facto. So the whole thing is upside down now, and this is why I really think that the whole thing is done because Republicans, if they're gonna turn over on this issue, on Russia being the bad guy, all of a sudden Russia's not the bad guy. I mean, if they're gonna just roll over on that, that means this thing is further gone than it even looks. It's further gone than it even looks. So it's like, the leader of the free world is Macron or probably maybe the British Prime Minister or whatever. But it's not us anymore. And this is this. So Josh, help me out with this. Help me out with this. I mean, am I exaggerating in any way?
Possibly a little, but
tell me how. Be specific.
Well, first of all, I think you and I are going to be far more aligned on the Ukraine v. Russia issue than a lot of others. I do need to say it first in way of apology, Mike. I'm sorry I got on here and riled everybody up again. Apparently, I am the bad seed in all these conversations. So sorry sorry for whatever it is I'm doing. But look,
great to see you, Josh.
yeah. Stephen, look, here's the thing. I think it is a mistake. Or let me rephrase. To me, the curiosity is not so much why Donald Trump, it's why so much of the Republican Party. There is a big difference between a J.D. Vance and a Tucker, say, and a Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio doesn't believe the garbage has been spewing recently. He's towing the party line, whereas J.D. Vance is kind of leading this. Maybe Russia's the side we should be on. That's a lot deeper than whatever, dictatorship aspirations Trump might have, or however much he wants to cozy up to Putin. I don't think you're wrong there, by the way. For whatever reason, he sees something in Putin that he admires. I don't get it. Maybe he wants to be like the guy. I don't quite understand it, and I think that is despicable and dangerous and all the things we could say about it. But it is what it is. It's why is the Republican Party going along with it? And there's a lot of different reasons. Not everybody in the Republican Party is. Some of them are keeping their heads down now. But I think there is a growing consensus, unfortunately, among the more nationalist populists that Russia is on our side, because if there's one thing they aren't, it's woke. They are against the European cabal that's trying to prop up Ukraine and institute sort of this European global elitist, far leftist world order that so many of Trump and his supporters fear. And so Ukraine almost becomes more of a proxy war, if you will. I don't think it's so much they don't like Ukraine, although I think they do believe that Ukraine is a corrupt, air quotes, it's not even a democracy now, as they're claiming, since they didn't hold elections, which is, I don't buy that at all. But I don't want to get off the subject without just saying that it's again, speaking as a Republican, as someone who, we can have reasonable debates about who we should or shouldn't ally ourselves with, but I think something that is deeply dangerous is when the United States is perceived, and we have been perceived more and more and more, as untrustworthy and a nation that does not keep its honors and commitments. And look, I'm going to say something that may rile you guys up. I was very upset when Barack Obama mentioned the red line to Syria and then didn't back it up. I think the way that Biden handled the Afghanistan withdrawal really harmed us. Now, I'm not making it a moral, let me be clear, that is not morally equivalent to what Donald Trump is doing at all. What Trump is doing is despicable, but it is further eroding this. In Trump's first term, one of the most awful things I think he did is stabbing the Kurds in the back, and he did it almost on a whim with a conversation with Erdogan, as near as we could tell. One of the most chilling things about that is what saved the Kurds in Turkey from what would probably have been annihilation was the Russians. The Kurds immediately got help from the Russians, and the reason I say that's scary is because how was it that Russia was able to get there that quickly? How did all these backroom deals take place that quickly? There have to be conversations all over the globe. What if America doesn't have our back? Who do we turn to next? That's happening. These nations, their survival in some sense depends on the Western order. And if we turn our backs on that, it's dishonorable and it's really dangerous.
Conversations like this remind me just how bipartisan foreign policy can get. And again, the post-Cold War, the Cold War era maxim was politics stops at the water's edge, because at that point we do have to worry about protecting the national interest and not just our own partisan interest. And my concern with Ukraine is not necessarily what happens by the end of the year. The Europeans, as much as the Republicans say otherwise, the Europeans have been doing their part relative to their economic strength. They have been providing their fair share of weaponry, support, logistics, all of that. Europe will band together. The invasion of Ukraine was such a unifying event for Europe and NATO that Sweden and Finland broke their neutrality to officially join a military alliance against Russia. Various international scholars and political scientists have always identified Europe as a potential superpower. I think Europe will be just fine. My problem is the Europeans are not going to wait for us to get ourselves together. We already saw this during the cycle when various European defense ministers were talking about 10 people in Wisconsin should not decide whether we can live in peace or not. You look at other international organizations like the World Health Organization. Do you think the World Health Organization is going to hit the pause button without American leadership, or is it going to look elsewhere? Right? That's when you get China, Russia stepping up and filling these places and bending them to their own interest. Right? And I'm not saying that to make moral arguments about either. I don't want to China or Russia, bash or anything. But the very fact of the matter is that when we step back, someone else is going to step forward, and we cannot control who that someone is going to be, right? And with Ukraine specifically, I think it's very devastating for the US 5-10 years down the line to be seen as a country whose word is not valuable. We promised Ukraine 30 years ago, give up your nuclear weapons and we'll protect you from the Russians. And now look where we are. We promised Europe 60, 70, 80 years ago, band together and we'll all work together to ensure that you can live in free Western liberal societies. Liberal in the sense of, government and elections and not, left, right. Just want to clarify that. And now look where we are in 2024. Do you think they're really going to wait around for us to get our act together, or do you think they're going to figure out how to go it without American leadership? And when we re-emerge from this era, hopefully, I don't know that we will, but should we re-emerge from this better and stronger, how much work are we going to have to do to convince the world that American leadership is worth following? We are making ourselves weaker now and in the future, just to cut off our nose and spite our faces. And it is a bit of messaging. Joe Biden's early handling of the Ukraine war was masterful. As it dragged on, it got a little less focused. And unfortunately for me, the best defense of Ukraine policy I heard was in the Republican debates from Nikki Haley. Right? That's a problem for me, because Republicans were not the ones waging or giving logistical support to this country to help its civilians maintain their own way of life.
Not only that, but Republicans were dragging their feet on the Ukraine bill.
Yes.
Just last year, right?
Precisely.
So, I mean, my thing is there are people out there who think what Donald Trump is doing is strong. The posturing in the Oval Office, the J.D. Vance chiming in. Oh, thank him. I didn't hear thank you. We're not giving out, bags of cash for charity. Every dollar we spend is an investment in our national security, so that NATO does not have to get directly involved. I even heard the argument, Trump is playing 40 chess because he understands that by publicly going on TV and looking as if he's hard on Zelenskyy, that somehow he can work, some kind of deal with Putin behind closed doors. I'm like, dude, this is the same Trump who not only got us into almost a nuclear war with North Korea with his tweets. This is the same Trump who, was constantly had to have advisors pull memorandums from his desk, according to Bob Woodward's book, that was going to take us out of NATO, that was going to remove troops from the 38th parallel in North and South Korea, right? I mean, so this notion that there's some kind of masterful strategy is fiction. There is no masterful strategy. There's no method to the madness here. And if you think this is wrong, this is beyond crazy. And another thing I want to say is, where was Lindsey Graham and all of the other Republicans who were about being upset with Trump? Where were they 10 years ago when Benjamin Netanyahu came into the Oval Office and disrespected President Obama, when Obama was telling him, to stop the expansion of settlements in the Gaza Strip, right? Where was all of the outrage for the respect of the Oval Office then?
Well, you know how 50 years ago when the president did it, it wasn't illegal? When the president's a Democrat, it's not disrespectful. That's really all it is.
But can I just back this up a little bit? Mike, I wish we have to realize when we're watching politics is both art and theater at the same time. And we're watching one of the greatest puppet masters at work. And I hate to give him his credit, but sometimes you have to separate the art from the artist in this moment. Vladimir Putin is working the game. He wants to readjust power. He remembers the America. He knows the history of the America that was worried about Russia and its tampering. And the reality is we've stopped, and I hate to sound like, hey, rah-rah America, we need to have these messages, but we don't have the fear of Russia that we used to. We aren't doing drills going under. Our kids are more concerned, and reasonably so, about active shooter situations than they are nuclear strikes in their classrooms. When those were the fears, Americans knew that Russia was the bad guy, and we could not give an inch to those individuals, that country. But America has stopped. We've stopped communicating that Russia bad. And that is the cultural shift in America. We went on a war on terror, and we were so worried about how the Middle East would go, and we were so focused on oil that we missed the fact that Russia, again, when you are focused and disciplined, like dictators can oftentimes be, they put things in work. Trump was flipped, and this may sound conspiratorial, call it what you want. Trump got flipped at that hotel, and that changed the game for him. When you are dealing with someone who is emotionally fragile and easily turned into fits of rage, you are able to see the mark ahead of them. And Putin saw the mark.
Can easily be swayed with flattery and favor.
Exactly. And so now you have someone in Donald Trump who is going to be friendly to Russia, who we don't want to make him, and that's why Zelensky said, you will feel the influence soon enough. The reality is we are watching the Russian government, the Russian, whatever we're going to call them, right? The Russian government slowly infiltrate, and now we're seeing the fruit of Vladimir Putin's discipline. Now America looks weak to Europe, and so now they're going to hive mind and get together, and that is not going to have the same effect as if the red, white, and blue America first and America's beauty and freedom coming to the aid of Europe. And so now we're going to watch what happens. And Zelensky told us that we are watching puppets at work when he says very profoundly that I will wear a costume when the war is over. He realizes that America is coming late to a war, and everyone in that Oval Office is wearing a costume. And Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend making the comment that, or whoever's partner that was, making those comments revealed something very important. America no longer is concerned about the things that we've historically worried about. The Russian interference in our elections was another moment where we did not focus on the problem at hand because Vladimir Putin had already worked his magic in America's political zeitgeist. The fact that our billionaire oligarchs in this country have manipulated our digital media to the point where Russian misinformation is at the fingertips. It takes 30 seconds to find a piece of Russian misinformation at the common American algorithm that they have on their smart devices. America has been infiltrated by the Russians. Everything we've seen on TV about the Russian fears are being manifested. And so America has become weakened because we, again, as a country, have lost the sight of our true common enemy. You don't think Vladimir Putin knew how to orchestrate and influence in the Middle East to get our focus off of what America was originally focused on, which was the Cold War or post-Cold War culture in America? This was a well-orchestrated collapse of our social norms orchestrated by the dictator Vladimir Putin. And he has his marks and he still has them. And so what we're seeing, our politics on the state side is married to the politics on the world stage. We are seeing the rise of nationalism in Europe and extreme ideologies in Europe and the rise of these social evils. Those are happening because Vladimir Putin needs them to continue to reunify the USSR or whatever you want to call it. That's his whole goal. And when we look at it through that lens, we can know that we have to do more than just send weapons over to Ukraine. We have to take a war footing. And Pete Hegseth is not cut up for that.
All of that is exactly why I think Donald Trump has no endgame here. Putin, we know he's a threat. We know the stakes. We know the erosion of America's credibility. We know what we know about, and that's the very thing that compels me to say that this is not 40 chess. This is not even checkers. This is someone who, for whatever reason, has chosen a side. And look, this is not a surprise. They were on the campaign trail saying they were going to give a huge hunk of Ukraine to Russia if they get elected. This is not a surprise, just like any of the domestic issues that we were talking about earlier are a surprise. They told you what they were going to do. And that's why I have no sympathy or patience for anyone who says, well, this is actually, strength. And I see this as a different way. There is no other way to see this. What are we getting out of this thing? What are we getting from cozying up to Russia? How is America's interest being served? And
his talking points, of course, are that, we've given $350 billion to this war effort. And, now that'll be cut off. There are, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who've been killed, and that'll stop. So peace is always an appealing talking point. Peace is always an appealing talking point. So that's what he's got. That's what he's got going for him. The word appeasement is never used anymore by Republicans. The specter of Neville Chamberlain is It's never brought up, you know. But I mean, you know, this is the same thing that happened 80 years ago, man. This is the same, or yeah, almost 90 years ago. It's the same thing. You know, it's the same. That's the same dynamic in place. You know, these right wing political parties in Europe, you know, they're gonna start winning eventually. You know, because you know, all of this immigration, you know, these black people and brown people, you know, going into these European countries, they're not gonna, you know, eventually it's the same dynamic is going to take place. So I mean, this is the you know, this is the Third Reich mentality happening all over again. That's my opinion, and this is why, you know, when Democrats say this kind of thing, I'm fascinated with how Republicans hear it. I mean, you know, does it sound alarmist? Does it sound out to lunch? Does it sound? I mean, so Josh, again, help me.
Didn't know I'd be on the hot seat so much tonight. No,
we need your help, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's I would say that most Republicans, whether or not they're for Trump, would not express things quite as alarmist as you are. Or maybe to put that another way, actually, maybe a better way to say this, I'm not as confident I can draw straight lines between where we're going and that we're going to end up with a fascist Europe or the far right taking over necessarily. I think where we're going is going to be bad, but bad things can break down in any number of ways. And so I'm not necessarily looking for, look, you're right. Chamberlain, we are constantly in danger of not learning the lesson that the more you appease the dictators, the worse it's going to go for you in the long run. I'm not saying there's never a time to sit down at the peace table, but you do so when they're in a negotiating position where they don't have any room to negotiate. They're, you know, willing to hear you out. But I think, gosh, I really wished I could respond to every freaking Republican out there. I just can't. There's too many different directions they would go. I think some would see it as what you're saying is alarmist. Others would agree with you. Is maybe the closest I come to answering that.
Well, why do you say there's so many directions you could go when we only see one direction? We only see one direction. We only see one leader. We only see one thing. You know, so you know, other Republicans that have been silenced or purged. You know, yeah. I mean, I mean, I'm trying to see if there's another way to look at this other than, you know, my brother, Professor Foster, Mike's, and Nathan's, or all of you guys, mentor. You know, he said, you know, his motto is don't ignore the obvious. You know, so I mean, what looks obvious to me, you know, say it ain't so.
Well, look, there's a huge difference between the J.D. Vances, who see Russia as less of a threat and see the New World Order as necessarily meaning America first means we need to take more of a backstage and that these other nations need to take care of their own. There's a huge difference between that and your, even though he's unwilling to say it apparently, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who up until 5 minutes ago had a much more pro-NATO, pro-Western alliance view of the world. And I think those differences do exist. Here's the thing. You're right. It's tamped down because we have a central leader in the Republican Party of Donald Trump. That doesn't last forever. And if Trump were to become unpopular or no longer the leader, I think you will very quickly see these voices of discontent. There is a lot of disagreement within the right as to what we ought to do internationally.
I think, you know, as we talk about the war in Ukraine, we also have to acknowledge the timing of it too, and how it ended up affecting, you know, the present we're living in now. You look at when Putin launched the war, COVID era relief programs were expiring, prices were starting to slowly inch up, and then now you have a Democratic president sending, you know, billions of dollars, not 350 billion like Trump likes to say, but billions of dollars over to Eastern Europe. And meanwhile, you know, people are starting to, you know, feel the shock of higher prices, starting to notice that, you know, they're not buying anything extra, but their grocery bills are going up, their energy bills are going up, because of just how much the world has to unfreeze from everything we experienced in 2020 and 2021. And it does speak a bit to messaging, because the messaging we said was protect democracy everywhere, which has been a winning message for Americans for a century, I think, over a little more than that. World War I was a little over 100 years ago, so yeah, more than a century. But the optics people saw was we're giving all of our money to East Ukraine. That's how America first got to take root. Now you had several people, including so-called serious Republicans, saying, actually spending this money on Ukraine is fantastic for us because we're grinding down Russia's war machines without spending a single American soldier. But where are those voices now, right? Kevin McCarthy was responsible on Ukraine funding. I have to give him that. But when the war started, Pelosi was speaker. It's not
Lindsey
him.
Graham was one of the voices. Lindsey Graham said, "Where have you been all my life? You're the ally I was always looking for."
And then Trump snapped his fingers and Lindsey Graham jumped back in line. Mitch McConnell was instrumental at pushing COVID aid through the Senate. He looked over at what was coming and said, I'd rather not spend the last 2 years of my career working with Trump again on foreign policy. On the right side, it's just giving up. And so just like Europeans have to figure out how they're going to fight this authoritarian mindset pushing on their way of life in Europe, Democrats have to figure out how they're going to go it alone and wage this point and make it very clear that spending to ensure that there is no land war in Eastern Europe is a good thing. That spending on aid programs to ensure that people in distressed regions around the world are not dying from preventable illnesses is a good thing. And spending money in hotspots to make sure that people grow up believing that American values are good. So yes, that means Sesame Street in Arabic in Iraq and Syria. These things are important. If you don't like it, you don't like it, but they're still important. I don't like eating Brussels sprouts. They're still good for me. That's what being an adult means.
Mike, I hate to be this guy. I have this cog here that I think we need to throw in here, because if we're going to be talking to kind of marry this Ukraine situation and the desperate nature of our party, of the Democratic Party, is y'all remember there is still another conflict happening. There's two more that we haven't even mentioned, but there is another one that's happening, and I find it distracting or disconcerting better that we have completely forgotten about Gaza and what is happening. And so I just want to throw that in there, because we think Vladimir Putin doesn't see that America right now can't walk and chew gum. That between the onslaught come Monday morning from the White House to what we'll see in the media, that we are being bombarded. And now that Kamala Harris has been defeated, right? Now we're not going to talk about what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. Vladimir Putin knows that we can't walk and chew gum. And so now this is his time to strike and do what he needs to do, because we were just so focused on what was happening in Gaza. And so I am concerned about how he's leveraging the Gaza situation to also continue the work of expanding his empire.
I look, the very first foreign call Donald Trump received was from Benjamin Netanyahu on election night. And there was a reason for that. And I said this to folks, they got upset, and some folks decided to cut me. Look, throughout 2024, I always said there's two choices here. Jill Stein is not going to be president. Okay? She got 18% of the vote. Okay.
How is this is a choice.
Right. She'll emerge again when it's time to take more votes away in 4 years. But my thing is, this was a choice between someone who was actually sending the Secretary of State in meetings with Netanyahu and his foreign secretary counterpart to actually prioritize civilian lives, and someone who's giving a blank check to Israel, the Netanyahu regime. That's it. That's the choice. You don't have to like it. That's the choice.
I'm sorry. It's a different argument. That's really not much of a choice, because we still got the blank checks anyway. I'm sorry. Go back.
To your point about being an adult and having to make decisions you don't want to make. Hey, you may not have been in love with the Biden-Harris ticket. You may not have been in love with the Harris-Walz ticket, but you knew they were a heck of a lot closer to your interests as things in Gaza than the opposition party, the other side that realistically had a chance at the White House. The Muslim American vote decided they were going to protest by not going to the ballot box. That is historically a losing way to protest. Protest without direction, protest without tangible objection is no protest at all. It is just noise. And so now they're finding out, like many other Americans, like the Latinos who thought that Donald Trump was talking about everybody but them, that when you have two choices and you're not 100% in love with one, get off your butt and choose the one that's more closely aligned to your interests. And that's that. And I don't understand why that's so complicated. I really
I don't
don't.
either.
I don't have
I don't
patience
either.
who
Yeah,
argue.
I don't either. But one thing, another thing I don't have patience for along those lines, though, is, when, when are we going to, when is the left or Democrats or whatever, when are they going to get smart about the importance of running a candidate who is likely to win? I mean, it's like that really, that really, it bothers me. It's like, and sometimes, I mean, Black people are to some extent maybe to blame, for that. I mean, because, to me, in my opinion, we live in a racist society. I mean, I think to me, it's obvious. It's always been obvious, and it's very obvious now. Barack Obama was a one-off, in my opinion. And, it's like, and this time when democracy was supposedly at stake, and I say supposedly just because we didn't act as if it was, even though we can see it was. I mean, why can't we run a ticket that is likely to win? I mean, I'm talking about personalities. The candidate matters. The candidate actually matters. So
Are
I
you
mean,
saying
it's
that
like,
Kamala Harris wasn't the right pick?
well, no, she wasn't. I mean, even though I loved her, I would love to see her as president, but she was a woman of color. She was a woman of color. So I mean, it's like,
She did turn a losing campaign into a coin flip. It would be interesting to see if
I
she had
know
more
she
time, maybe she
did everything she could do.
But
She did
close is good in
everything,
horseshoes. I get what you're saying.
but she can't change her demographic.
And
She
close
can't.
only matters in horseshoes. I do get what you're saying, but we
Yeah,
were forced into a bad
two
time.
young white guys with hair. Two young white guys with hair. So it's easy. It's easy.
Yeah.
Clinton and Gore was, I mean, it's like, to me, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's obvious. And we have a lot of people that could have, a lot of combinations that could have prevailed. That could have prevailed. I mean, Donald Trump has only beaten women candidates. He's only beaten women candidates. I mean, it's like,
Unmatched.
huh?
I was saying he's unmatched. He's
Right.
his own.
He's undefeated against women candidates. I mean, so it's like, I mean, to me, at some point you have to play to win. You have to play to win. You can't be nice. Black people need to grow up about that. We don't need to have a black person on the ticket. We don't need it. We did that. We need to win. So I mean, I know.
If we're going to show our allies that we're serious, and I think what we were talking about earlier in the program, Mike, the reality is if the Democratic Party doesn't get its act together, we then also become the same, we die of the same curse that we're seeing, and we're trying to not to project to our allies. If we don't do the work to fix our party so we can win in the next presidential cycle and win in the midterm, we tell our allies that we don't actually care about Gaza. We don't actually care about the reality of what's happening in Ukraine. So we have to actually do the work of fixing our party and that's how we tell our allies, don't worry, we're working and we're going to win the next election. And then we're going to return some sense of American order and normacy. We're going to be the diplomacy partner. We're going to do the work. We're going to give our allies funding. We're going to make sure that our NGOs are funded and that are able to help the poorest countries in this world, and making sure that our allies are defended, that our treaties are honored, and that we're making a difference. So it is, I think what is interesting, we're not even hearing the messaging that we must fix ourselves so then we can be the bastion of hope, that beautiful Statue of Liberty for everyone to come, all the huddled masses longing to be free. If that's going to happen, we have to actually fix our body.
Well, I just want to land the plane here. You know, we've discussed a lot tonight pertaining to foreign policy. One of the things before I land the plane that, you know, I hear Charlie Kirk going around college campuses saying is that Donald Trump presided over an era of peace. You know, and I specifically wanted this platform to be something to stand against misinformation. And I have to say something about that because, you know, in 2019, Trump greenlit the chaos when he abruptly pulled United States troops from northern Syria, paving a way for a Turkish invasion, right? That is not an era of peace. And I think Josh alluded to that. You know, I also want to touch on the fact that, you know, Mr. Foster said Black people need to realize, you know, you can't always have a candidate of color on the ticket. And I think that's valid because let's face it, Obama's a once in a generation figure, right? We're not going to probably see something like that. If we're alive to see it, we'll probably be old men, right? And there are people. There's a large group of America that is still not over the fact that Obama was in the White House for 8 years, and I mean that's just the reality. Now that may not be how many other people feel, but many do feel that way, and so that is something I think Mr. Stephen Foster was alluding to. But as it pertains to Black, I think the older Black people, the Congressional Black Caucus members in particular, the Clyburns, the Maxine Waters, they understood the value of standing by your nominee. They understood that. And I think they tried to replicate exactly how the Republicans were handling their nominee, right? Stand by your man, no matter what happens, right? But I think this was a wonderful discussion. Reminds me of Eisenhower's quote after he left very tense meetings with Nixon. We had a good growl. Josh, I want to take a moment and thank you for being here tonight. I know the conversation got a little bit heated, but I really appreciate you stepping into this space, especially as the only conservative voice in a sea of strong opinions. I think your perspective is incredibly valuable, and it's not easy to stand your ground in a room full of opposing views. So it's these kinds of conversations, I think, that Nate pointed out earlier too, that help us understand each other better, challenge our way of thinking. That's what this platform is all about. So thank you. And I want to also thank Nate, Reggie, Mr. Stephen Foster, for what you brought to the table. With that being said, that's going to conclude tonight's episode of the Political Mike Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mike Podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMike, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.